There is a moment, and almost every person alive has felt it, when you realize that the thing you were desperately chasing no longer matters to you. Maybe it was someone's approval. Maybe it was a title, a status, a relationship, or a version of yourself you thought you had to become. And then one day, without warning, you simply stopped caring. And in that exact moment, something strange happened. You felt lighter. You felt free. You felt, for the first time in a long time, like yourself. That feeling was not an accident. That feeling was philosophy working in silence. Welcome. If you have ever exhausted yourself trying to control what people think of you, trying to fix what cannot be fixed, trying to hold on to things that were never truly yours, this video is going to change something in you. Not with empty motivation, not with clever tricks, but with the ancient, field-tested, battle-hardened wisdom of the Stoics, the philosophers who figured out 2,000 years ago what most people are only beginning to understand today. The less you care about the things that do not deserve your care, the happier, the calmer, and the more powerful you become. This is Stoic Zeno. I am glad you are here. If this channel has ever given you a thought that stayed with you, do me one small favor before we begin. Hit that like button, drop a comment below telling me what you are trying to care less about right now. Share this video with someone who is carrying too much weight today. And if you have not already, subscribe to Stoic Zeno so that this kind of wisdom finds you every single week. Now, let us begin. There is a war happening inside most people at almost every moment of the day. It is not a war with enemies or obstacles. It is a war with reality itself. A war waged by a mind that insists things should be different than they are. That people should behave differently than they do. That life should cooperate with our plans, our feelings, our timelines. And the weapons used in this war are the most exhausting weapons imaginable. Anxiety, resentment, obsession, over-explanation, people-pleasing, the need to be understood, the need to be right, the need to be chosen. Most people call this caring. The Stoics called it something else. They called it the source of unnecessary suffering. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, a private journal never intended for publication, which makes it perhaps the most honest philosophical document ever written, that you have power over your mind, not outside events. He did not write this as an abstract principle. He wrote it as a daily reminder to himself, a Roman emperor surrounded by war, betrayal, loss, and the constant noise of people who wanted things from him. He had every reason in the world to be consumed, and he chose, deliberately and repeatedly, not to be. That choice, the choice to stop giving your energy, your identity, and your peace of mind to things outside your control, is the beating heart of Stoic philosophy. And it is, when you actually practice it, the most radical act of self-liberation available to a human being. Let us walk through this together, not in the abstract, not as theory, but as something you can feel in your body by the time we are done. The first thing to understand is the difference between caring about something and being enslaved by it. The Stoics were not indifferent people. That is one of the most persistent and destructive misunderstandings of this philosophy. Marcus Aurelius grieved his children. Epictetus knew what it meant to suffer. He was born into slavery and carried physical injuries his entire life. Seneca watched friends die, endured exile, and eventually faced his own execution. These were not men who floated above life in some detached cloud of not caring. They cared deeply. They cared about virtue. They cared about their work. They cared about the people they loved and the duties they carried. But they had learned, through hard experience and disciplined thinking, to distinguish between the care that gives life meaning and the care that simply consumes it without return. There is a kind of caring that is generative. It is the care you bring to your craft, your relationships, your character. It is the care that builds. The Stoics honored this kind of care completely. And then there is a kind of caring that is corrosive. It is the care for outcomes you cannot control, for opinions you cannot shape, for the past you cannot change, for the future you cannot predict. It is the care that eats you from the inside while changing absolutely nothing outside. Epictetus made this distinction the foundation of his entire philosophy. In the Enchiridion, his handbook for living, and the very first lines draw a line in the sand. Some things are within our power, and some things are not. Within our power are our opinions, our impulses, our desires, our aversions. Not within our power are our bodies, our reputations, our positions, the actions of others. This is not a small observation. This is the map. And once you have this map, you begin to see how much of your suffering has been spent in territory that was never yours to begin with. Think about the last time you were truly upset, not mildly annoyed, truly, deeply disturbed. What was it about? In almost every case, when you trace the thread far enough back, the disturbance was rooted in something outside your control. Someone did not respond the way you expected. A situation did not unfold according to your plan. Someone formed an opinion of you that you did not agree with. Something you worked for did not arrive the way you thought it would. And notice what happened inside you. The mind began to spin. You replayed the scenario. You imagined what you should have said, what you might still say, how you could fix it, what it meant about you, what others would think. Hours passed. Days, perhaps. Enormous reserves of mental and emotional energy poured into a problem that, in most cases, your thinking did not solve. It only prolonged. The Stoics would say, you were not suffering because of the event. You were suffering because of your relationship to the event. Because you had decided, without realizing you had decided, that this thing deserved the full weight of your inner life. Our Marcus Aurelius addressed this directly. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your judgment about it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. At any moment. Not once you have processed it enough. Not once enough time has passed. Not once the other person apologizes or the situation resolves itself. Right now. The power to revoke the judgment is always present. It does not depend on external conditions. It depends entirely on you. This is what it means to care less. Not to feel nothing, not to become stone, but to stop handing over your internal sovereignty to things that have no right to it. Now let us talk about what this actually looks like in practice, because philosophy that stays theoretical is just entertainment. The Stoics were not theorists, they were practitioners, and the practice of caring less, strategically, deliberately, wisely, changes everything. The first practice is what the Stoics called negative visualization, or what Marcus Aurelius simply called remembering the nature of things. Most of the time, when we care too much about something, it is because we have unconsciously elevated it beyond its actual worth. We have told ourselves, without realizing we have told ourselves, that this thing, this person's opinion, this outcome, this possession, this position, is essential. That without it, something fundamental breaks. The practice of negative visualization asks you to gently, calmly look that belief in the eye and test it. Seneca practiced this regularly. He would sometimes voluntarily set aside comfort, eat simple food, wear plain clothes, sleep on a harder surface, not as punishment, but as a reminder. He wrote, "I do this to test myself, not to torment myself. To see whether I can bear these things, not just imagine I can." When you practice imagining the loss of what you are gripping too tightly, something interesting happens. You realize that you would survive it. You realize that the thing you have built your peace around is not as essential as you believed. And in realizing this, you stop giving it the power to hold your happiness hostage. This is not pessimism, this is freedom. The person who has already imagined losing something and found that they would be okay is no longer afraid of losing it. And the person who is no longer afraid is no longer enslaved. The second practice is what we might call the radical reduction of your concern with reputation. Of all the things humans spend their energy caring about, reputation may be the most expensive and the most fruitless. We care what people think. We shape our words, our choices, our appearance, our silence, our noise, around the invisible audience of other people's judgment. And this invisible audience is, in most cases, not even watching. Marcus Aurelius was a man whose every action was scrutinized by an empire. If anyone had reason to curate his reputation obsessively, it was him. And yet his private journals reveal a man who had made a different choice. He wrote, "How much time and effort is wasted worrying about what others think of you? Stop caring about the opinions of those who have no concern for your soul." He returned to this theme again and again throughout his meditations. The people whose opinions you are seeking, where will they be in 100 years? Where will their opinions be? What will any of it mean? This is not nihilism, this is perspective. The perspective that comes when you zoom out far enough to see that the social drama consuming you right now is, in the scale of things, a ripple on water. And ripples do not deserve a lifetime of worry. Epictetus was even more direct. He taught that the person who wants to be free must not want anything from those who are not free themselves. He understood that seeking approval from people who are themselves lost in confusion and anxiety is not connection. It is contagion. When you stop managing your image for the crowd, when you let people think what they think, say what they say, form the opinions they form, you get something back. You get your own mind. You get the freedom to act from your actual values rather than from the performance of values you think will be approved. This is not coldness. This is clarity. And clarity, when you have lived without it for a long time, feels almost unbearably good. The third practice is the one that might be the hardest and also the most transformative. Learning to care less about being understood. There is a hunger in the human heart to be known, truly known, by the people around us. To be seen accurately. To have our intentions recognized, our efforts acknowledged, our inner world witnessed by someone else. This hunger is not pathological. It is human. But what happens when it becomes a need? What happens when your peace depends on whether the person in front of you accurately perceives you? What happens when you cannot rest until you have explained yourself enough, defended yourself enough, clarified enough, justified enough? The answer is that you lose yourself chasing a mirror that may never show your face correctly. Because people see through their own lens, always. Their perception of you is filtered through their own experiences, fears, needs, and blind spots. No amount of explanation fully overcomes this, and the attempt to overcome it can become its own prison. Marcus Aurelius knew this. He faced constant misunderstanding from senators, generals, his own family, the historians who would write about him. And he wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me how we love ourselves above all others, yet we value the opinion of others more than our own." Sit with that for a moment. We love ourselves above all others, and yet we hand the verdict on our worth to people who see us only partially, only occasionally, only through their own limited view. The Stoic practice here is to do the right thing and release the need for it to be understood. Do your work well and stop requiring that people recognize it. Be honest and stop needing to be believed. Be kind and stop expecting gratitude. Be yourself and stop waiting for permission. This is what Epictetus meant when he said, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." The rest, the perception, the response, the recognition, is not in your power, and pretending otherwise costs you something you cannot afford to keep paying. The fourth practice touches something that most people feel but rarely name: the exhausting habit of overinvestment in outcomes. We care about results. This is natural. We work toward things and we want those things to happen. But somewhere between healthy ambition and peace of mind, many people make an unconscious trade. They begin to attach their sense of self, their happiness, their stability, to whether the outcome arrives the way they planned. And then life, which has never once asked permission before doing what it does, introduces a complication, a delay, a different result. A no when you were expecting yes. And the person who has fused themselves with the outcome falls apart, not because the situation is catastrophic, but because they placed everything inside something they could not control. The Stoics had a practice for this too. Seneca called it working with reservation. You aim for the outcome and you prepare fully and you give your best effort. And you add, silently and sincerely, unless something prevents it. Not as defeat, not as low ambition, but as a structural acknowledgement of reality. You are doing your part. The outcome is a collaboration between your effort and 10,000 factors you will never fully see. Your effort is yours. The outcome is not. When you internalize this, really internalize it, not just say it, something remarkable happens to your relationship with action. You begin to act more freely, not less. Because the fear of failure shrinks. Because your identity is no longer riding on the result. Because you have separated the quality of your effort from the verdict of circumstances. This is the paradox the Stoics understood profoundly. The person who cares less about the outcome often produces better outcomes, because they act from clarity rather than desperation. Because they are present in the work rather than consumed by anxiety about the result. Because they can see the situation accurately rather than through the distortion of need. The fifth practice is perhaps the most countercultural thing this philosophy asks of you. Stop fighting other people's nature. We spend extraordinary amounts of energy being disturbed by the fact that people are the way they are. This person is selfish. That person is dishonest. This one is careless. That one is cruel. And we experience this as an injustice, as something that should not be, that we must resist, argue against, or somehow fix. But Marcus Aurelius, who spent his reign dealing with some of the most difficult people imaginable, kept returning to a different frame. He wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself that the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are this way because they cannot tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil. And I have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, sharing not the same blood or birth, but the same mind and the same divine spark." He was not writing this in despair. He was writing it in preparation. He was practicing the art of not being surprised by human nature, and in not being surprised, not being derailed. When someone behaves badly toward you, the Stoic question is not, how could they? The Stoic question is, given what they know, given what they have experienced, given what they can see, is this not exactly what you might expect? And if it is what you might expect, why are you giving it the power to collapse your morning? This is not indifference to wrongdoing. Marcus Aurelius still acted. He still made corrections, maintained standards, built institutions, and held people accountable where he could. The practice was not to pretend wrong is right. It was to stop letting the existence of wrong become a catastrophe for your inner life. Care less about whether the world is populated with imperfect people. It always will be. Care more about who you are in response to them. That is the only place where your power actually lives. Now let us talk about what happens when you actually begin to live this way. Because the rewards of this philosophy are not small and they are not abstract. The first thing you notice is what I would call the return of attention. When you stop investing mental energy in things outside your control, other people's opinions, outcomes you cannot determine, situations you cannot change, you suddenly find that you have enormous amounts of attention available that you did not know you had. This attention is extraordinarily valuable. It can go toward your work, your creativity, the people in front of you, your own growth, your own enjoyment of the small, genuine pleasures of being alive. Suddenly a meal tastes better. A walk has more in it. A conversation with someone you love has more depth. This is not because the world changed. It is because your attention came home. Seneca wrote, "It is not that I have little time. It is that I waste much." He was writing this as a man who understood that most of what we think of as living is actually just the anxious management of things that were never ours to manage. When you stop that management project, time opens up. Life opens up. The second thing you notice is a change in your relationships. Counterintuitively, when you stop needing specific responses from the people around you, your relationships often deepen. because people can feel the difference between someone who needs something from them and someone who is simply present with them. The person who is not calculating approval, not performing, not anxiously waiting for validation, that person is actually available. And availability, real presence, real attention without agenda, is one of the rarest and most valuable things you can offer another human being. You also become less afraid of loss in relationships, because you have stopped making your peace dependent on whether the relationship continues in a particular form. You can love someone completely without gripping them, and love without grip is a very different experience for both people than love with grip. The third thing, and this one tends to surprise people, is that you become more effective, not less. There is a common fear that if you care less, you will do less, try less, achieve less. This fear makes sense from the outside, but it inverts the actual mechanism. Most of the energy that goes into anxious caring does not improve results. It just burns. The hours spent replaying a difficult conversation did not make it better. The worry about an outcome did not change it. The obsession with what others think did not improve your performance. It likely degraded it. When that energy is redirected toward the actual work, toward clear thinking, skillful action, honest effort, results tend to improve. Not always dramatically, not always immediately, but consistently. The craftsman who is not performing for an audience and is simply making something as well as they can tends to make better things than the craftsman constantly checking for approval. There is a word the Stoics used for the state that this practice moves you toward. The word is ataraxia, a Greek term that means something like undisturbedness, a mind that is not thrown around by circumstance, a self that is not dependent on the weather of external events for its basic orientation. This is not happiness in the shallow sense. It is not the happiness of getting what you want. It is the happiness that exists underneath the wanting and the getting, the stable ground that remains when the noise settles. Marcus Aurelius described it as the ability to have tranquility in the midst of everything. Not because everything becomes peaceful, but because the center holds, because there is something in you that the world cannot reach without your permission. Epictetus, who had been enslaved, who had known suffering that most of us will never encounter, said that no one is free who is not master of themselves. Not freedom from hardship, not freedom from difficulty or loss or pain, but freedom from the belief that your happiness lives somewhere outside you in the hands of circumstances you cannot control. This is the promise of caring less, not a numb life, and not an empty one, but a full one, full of the things that genuinely matter, cleared of the debris of things that never did. Let me leave you with one final image from the ancient world, because the Stoics loved images that cut through abstraction and touch something real. Marcus Aurelius once wrote about a man standing on a cliff above the ocean, watching the waves. Wave after wave rises and crashes. Some waves are enormous, some are small, some would knock you down if you stood in them. And the man watches from above, not untouched, not unaware, not pretending the waves are not real or powerful, but standing on ground that the waves cannot reach. This is what the practice builds. Not armor, not walls, not detachment in the cold sense, but elevation, the ability to observe, to respond, to engage with the full reality of life, including its pain, its difficulty, its unpredictability, from a place of ground that is yours, that you have built, that no wave can take from you unless you walk down into the water and hand it over. The less you care about the waves, the ones you cannot stop, the ones that come without asking permission, the ones shaped by forces entirely outside your control, the more time you spend on that ground. And the view from there is very different from the view from inside the surf. Try it. Not as a philosophy experiment, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a lived practice, starting today. The next time something outside your control attempts to seize your peace, pause. Ask yourself, is this within my power? If the answer is no, return to your ground. Not with violence toward your own feelings. You are allowed to feel what you feel. but with clarity about where you are going to plant your flag. The more you do this, the more natural it becomes. The more natural it becomes, the lighter you feel. And the lighter you feel, the more you understand. Not as a slogan, but as an actual lived reality. That the less you care, the happier you become. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius knew this. Epictetus knew this. Seneca knew this. And now, you know it too. Thank you for being here with me today. This community, every single one of you who watches, reflects, and chooses to carry wisdom into your daily life, is the reason this work matters. If today's video gave you something real, something you can use, something that shifted even a small thing in the way you see your own mind, then do me this favor. Like this video right now, because it helps more people find this philosophy when they need it most. Leave a comment below. Tell me one specific thing you are practicing caring less about this week. Be honest. That comment might be the thing that helps someone else who reads it later. Share this video with someone in your life who is exhausted by carrying too much. It might be exactly what they need today. And if you are not yet subscribed to Stoic Zeno, this is the moment. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so that this kind of wisdom is always within reach. The Stoics believed that philosophy was not something you studied. It was something you lived, every day, in small choices and large ones, in moments of ease and moments of pressure. In the way you hold your attention and the way you respond to what you cannot control. You are already on that path. Keep walking it. This is Stoic Zeno. Until next time, stay grounded, stay free, and remember, the ground is always there. It is always yours. Come back to it.